can give me some guidance on this. What I want to address is the 1629 clause about senior housing. This is a House bill.
I can actually, there's some copies of it. I can, what John is referring to is actually on the third page, under 4B,
It's 42B.
or 42B, sorry.
And this has a direct impact on our senior housing article. So, should I open the hearing and do this?
Yeah, you might as well
Okay.
let the board decide.
So I'm gonna open the hearing. And shall I read this out? That's
Yeah.
probably a good idea. So this is a pending bill in the House, the State House. If a municipality allows an increased density, reduced lot size, expedited approval, or other dimensional or procedural incentive under this section for the development of housing for older persons as defined and regulated pursuant to RSA 354A15. That's the RSA 354A15 is what empowers, I believe, empowers the ability to have senior housing specifically addressed. If it does, it shall allow the same incentive for development of all other types of housing development. Beginning January 1st, 2021, incentives established for housing for older persons shall be deemed applicable to all types of housing development, regardless of whether a local land use ordinance or regulation specifically provides for their application to all types of housing development. So my understanding of this is it's essentially piggybacking onto, if a town has a senior housing article or amendment with incentives, which is pretty much how you would do it, that no longer is specifically for senior housing. It's for any kind of development, which is not what we were trying to do here. And the other thing about this wording is it's not, and maybe David, you might be able to give me your impression, but the way it's phrased doesn't say that, for instance, with our senior housing proposal, it's limited to the Lyme Common District. But there's no language in here that addresses, all it says is very broadly, it shall allow the same incentive for development of all other types of housing development. So it's not clear to me whether that's town-wide or just for the area that you're addressing, we're addressing. So what I'd like to do first is get the board's input on the impact of this clause, because it completely, I mean, the point of the senior housing was to encourage senior housing. This is for all kinds of housing, and generally, the reason that senior housing is encouraged is because it needs the incentives. Standard housing doesn't need the incentives, so it doesn't make a lot of sense, and I think it really damages our whole reasoning here.
So, I have a question. So the legislature has the legal right to override any town zoning retroactively?
Yep.
That's been,
Well, basically,
court?
municipalities only have the authority that's given by the legislature. So anything that the legislature says what you can and can't do, so they can change what you can and can't do.
It's not, this isn't, I forget the phrase, what, a home rule, is a home rule, the state runs the show.
Yeah, I just wanted to clear that up.
Okay. So,
And-
yeah,
And forgive me, I did not hear it clearly in the beginning, is this a proposed bill?
Yes.
This is a pending bill.
pending
And
bill?
yeah,
It's being worked on,
Right.
it's not pending in that we're waiting for its effective date, but it's being worked on.
So it's in
already
workshop
now.
and committee?
yeah,
Yes.
it's in
Okay.
committee and subcommittee. I've been in touch with our representatives, and I heard back from two of them. And the main thing I wanted to know was, would we have any, is it possible that this would have been removed by the time of this meeting? And that, I was told absolutely not, that will not happen. So, this is the pending language, and we don't know, but this is all we have to work with.
Right, but it just means it's a bill.
Yes.
Yeah,
So a lot of bills get voted out unanimously not to pass.
yeah.
So this one very well could be one of those.
I don't know whether it very well could be.
Well, I mean,
Well, it's possible, but what I heard from our representatives, that this is was 1629, which holds this. It was a bipartisan bill, and I have no idea, yeah.
Yeah, well, I've been trying to follow it through the New Hampshire Municipal Association, and last week, they updated us saying the subcommittee also discussed, it was suggested, and the subcommittee seemed to agree, that this should be changed to require allowance, such that it would be only for workforce housing, not for
All kinds of housing.
Given that workforce housing is the point of House Bill 1629, there's no reason to force municipalities to create incentives for luxury housing. The real estate market already provides plenty of
This
incentives.
is the
So,
language
and then the
for
subcommittee met
amendment.
yesterday,
I still already
and,
copies of those bills.
so I don't know what
I don't have any more.
happened yesterday. So they understand that as written, it's too broad. So it sounds like it's going to be reduced in its scope, to be hopefully more, focused on affordable housing, workforce housing.
Just want to,
So
we're
I'm,
recording this meeting
I would
from
think
right there.
that would be more logical
No, you're
outcome.
not.
Would definitely be more logical, but do we know what's gonna happen?
Well, we don't know, but, for me, it is a gamble, but I would kind of rather go forward, with the understanding that it would be for workforce housing also, and not for every kind of housing, because
Yeah,
we
every
need
kind of
workforce
housing is ridiculous.
and we need senior housing.
Yeah,
Then our gamble is anything that would come through and get approved between now and next town meeting. That's the gamble. Well, it's actually anything that would come through, in terms of submission of applications, would need to be approved necessarily, if we wanted to change it.
Can I ask a couple of procedural questions about the Hampshire legislature, because I'm not that familiar. Do all bills get a hearing in committee, or do they have to be selected to go by committee chair or by leadership?
I don't know.
Okay.
And the other thing is, like, there was another
Does
bill.
anybody know? Do all bills go to committee in the legislature, or do they get chosen by somehow by leadership? Because in Maine, every single bill goes to committee.
Anybody in the audience know?
I have to look that up, I can't remember.
Okay,
My sense is
every
that,
bill, but most.
Most.
okay. So I'm just trying to figure out exactly where it is in process, because,
I know it went to subcommittee.
but then again, every single bill, even that might allow you to marry your sister would be required to go to subcommittee if every bill goes to subcommittee. No, I'm dead serious. In Maine, every single bill goes to committee and gets heard and worked. And a lot of them get voted out unanimous not to pass, and the same bills go in year after year after year, and they get voted out unanimous not to pass, because people just keep trying. And so I don't mean to minimize this might be very scary, but if it's still early in the process, there's still perhaps lots of time for it to be changed. and not say it's a pending bill, which sounds like, as you said, you know, it's about to become law, and then it still has to go
Oh,
back.
no, by pending, I meant, this is the current language.
Right, but then, so that.
Anyway, your point, I get your
Okay,
point, was
so-
well made.
So just trying to understand how many opportunities there are for this to continue to be amended, and then it still has to go over to both legislative bodies, city board, and then has to go to the governor. There's a long way for this bill to go. So what I would suggest we do is we continue on our path, recognizing that perhaps it could be amended to be, which would seem a little more reasonable, to go to workforce housing. And then if we get to the point where we have something in front of the town and we realize that it will have a broader impact on all of our zoning, we might have to get up in front of the town meeting and say, we're pulling, you know,
I don't
we
think
ask you
we
to not
can't
pass.
pull it.
No, well, yeah, we ask you to not pass this because this is what will happen.
Yeah.
But I don't think stopping it now because somebody proposed a bill that might have some, what sound like fairly cockamamie, provisions in it, would be worth waiting out.
Yeah, I mean, it would be very disappointing to pull it after all the input and work that's gone into it.
And I assume there's no legal way we can write it so that if this should pass.
You, no opportunity right now
Well,
to
we
make
don't have the
changes.
I thought of that, it also, is if we could,
Well, we can't make any
Yeah,
changes
we
now.
can't make any changes.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
this is it, or we don't go forward.
Yeah, right.
Any other thoughts?
Well, it seems to me that, you know, if we go forward and then we have this wait and see, not knowing, which puts some unknown, and then the other choice is that we postpone a season and see what it does. You know, the question then begs, you know, have we really lost out? You know, we promised folks senior housing amendment this year, but, you know, given the risk, is there enough risk there that you actually decide to wait? That's another choice, is to wait a year. I mean, the work that we've done doesn't go away, it just gets tabled for a year.
Okay, Vicky?
I wish we could, you know, but one of the reasons why I support going forward with what we've got is because there's another petitioned amendment, and, you know, I'd like to give voters a choice. Our senior housing in the common district compared to all up and down Route 10. And so I believe that if people feel like they've gotta do something to make the housing situation better, that they might choose the one that's more focused for seniors in the Lyme Common District. So that is part of my reasoning to go forward. If it were not for, you know, that petitioned amendment, I would say, yeah, I think it's wise to wait a year. But that's where I am on it.
I understand.
That
Yeah,
petition amendment doesn't have anything to do with senior housing.
Yeah.
No, nothing to do with senior housing.
I think the petition zoning amendment is a different issue. I know that there have been statements put out that, you know, it's a choice between the two. I don't see that at all. I mean, that's like such a different animal. It's just doesn't even correlate.
I think in a way, Vicki was talking just as far as the board's responsiveness, you know.
Well, that I agree, but I don't see them as correlated in.
They're not the same,
Yeah.
but in terms of wanting to get off the dime on doing something about housing,
Yeah,
you know,
that was
we're
the whole
offering
point
something
of,
that's a little less disruptive to the community than the petition
I would
amendment.
say, a lot less disruptive.
Oh, yeah.
But Vicki, I'll take the counterpoint quickly, and it's sort of stating the obvious, that if we do go through with it, and this House bill passes all the way through, and from what I've read from NHMA, you know, this is basically the governor's press to try to address, and it's all throughout New England, you hear about it in Vermont also, you know, the housing situation, and, you know, the risk is, if you will, that it does pass in some form close to what is written, that we end up losing a lot of control over how Lyme gets developed. And so there's a pretty substantial
Well, one thing I will say, the way that our senior housing amendment is written is that it comes to the planning board and, we'll get to look at them all.
But if,
This would be the process that you would go through.
so if it, to Kevin's point, if it remains all types of housing, we would have to approve it.
So,
I don't know
Again-
if that's it.
again,
Well, how wouldn't it be? Because what they're saying is, you know, we have Article 13 senior housing. You can take out senior housing and put Article 13 all types of housing.
Yeah, and it has to come to the planning board.
And,
And so we have to find that it's harmonious with the community and, you know, all the things in the site plan.
We have something.
so, thanks to,
Judy.
Judy, yeah, all bills get referred to committee. So this bill is no better than the worst bill in the legislature, as far as we know, other than it's got commentary. So it hasn't been voted on, other than it's just been passed down to committee. So I don't think it's worth at this stage a lot of hand wringing right now, other than to know that it's out there and to try to respond to it. And to call our legislators and lobby to say, we think this is a bad idea for a variety of reasons. But as the Municipal Association says, they're trying to make it more reasonable to limit the workforce housing. A lot of amendments, bills get worked very heavily. From my experience, by the way, I served in the Maine legislature for a term, and I worked in the legislature for a number of years, so I've negotiated on bills, I've worked in committee, and a lot happens in committee. And so, again, I just don't see that it's worth a lot of hand-wringing because somebody proposed this. Because that's all it is at this point, is that somebody proposed it and put the language in the bill. So, if it were to have been voted out, or it got voted out of committee, or they took a preliminary vote and it sounded like it was gonna survive, it was gonna get recommended, then the next question is it a unanimous vote or is it a split vote? Because in most legislatures, if it's a unanimous vote, it goes to the House without debate. If it's a split vote, then it gets debated in the House and it can be amended in whichever body that it goes. So there's a long way to go in the legislative process before we have to worry about one phrase in one bill. But we should be very well aware of it, and I think we should proceed, and we still have an opportunity to respond if, because holding up our process because somebody threatened something in a bill we'll drive ourselves crazy, we may never do anything again.
right. So what I would propose then, is it sounds like there's enough support for throwing this open into the hearing, that we go forward with the hearing, and that after we're done with that, we'll take a vote. Is that okay with
And
everyone?
obviously, members of the public may have other thoughts.
Yeah, I'm sure. All right, so, yeah,
Are David and I members, or how are we doing this?
I'm going to appoint David for Eric Furstenberg, so you will be a voting member. So what I'll open or continue this hearing to address the senior housing article. Now, is there anything before we go to the public that anybody on the board wants to say concerning the proposal?
I did pass this final language through town council again, and other than the 25-year language still stating that she doesn't feel that's necessary.
But it's legal.
It's legal.
Yeah.
She has no issues with it at all.
Okay. So it's been legally approved, basically. Okay. All right, I take that as there are no further comments from the board. Okay, I'd like to throw it to the public, so anybody who would like to comment, please do. Rusty?
Yeah, sure, I'll make the first comments. I have an issue with meeting 675 in our notifications, that one of the reasons we don't see too many people here tonight, and we didn't see anybody at the other meetings, is that the word does not get out around town. And so in this particular case, I think you have another issue that this warrant may not be able to be placed this year because this particular meeting was not properly warned.
What was done incorrectly?
There was no posting in 2 places in town.
Yes, there was.
Where?
There's one on the website and one out here on this bulletin board. Website is considered a public place. So it was, and you got an email telling you, referring that back to you after you complained earlier today.
Okay, well, we'll see. We'll take it up with the
Okay,
department.
so
and see.
duly noted.
Yeah, it needs to be warned. I mean, we need to have public, this notice that he's talking about was noticed on December 24th, 36 days ago, on Christmas Eve.
So the feedback you got was that it was okay?
The newspaper ad went out for both hearings, and it was put in the newspaper. I tried to get it in on the 31st, or the 23rd. They said I was too past their deadline, so it went out on the 24th.
Okay, so that.
But it does meet the state statute for meeting notices.
And we'll put that in the minutes, Rusty's point in the minutes, and it'll be on the record. Any other comments? Mr. Roby?
You all are loath to postpone the senior housing, I know. But it seems to me that if there is any meaningful risk that this kind of statute will be adopted, we should wait to see what happens. Postponing senior housing for 1 year is not that desperate a remedy, when the alternative is to open all of the town to housing, like the same housing rules that you would have for senior housing. You have real incentives for senior housing. We don't need them for all housing. So making it clear, I would suggest that this board vote or adopt a resolution that says we are unanimously in favor of the amendment, and we would put the amendment forward, but for the risk of this legislation. And as far as the legislation likelihood of passing is concerned, if I heard correctly, this is Governor Sununu behind it. This is not some wild, crazy scheme. This is the governor saying, this is what I want, because I want to have incentive for housing. So it's probably going to pass. I don't think we should take the chance. I think what we should do instead is the board should make it clear that it stands foursquare for senior housing. It's going to put it off for 1 year, and during this upcoming months, work with senior housing advocates across the state, with the Municipal Association, with our legislators, to kill this bill or reform it so that it makes sense. But I don't think we should take a chance on it. There's no need to rush senior housing through it. It can wait for 1 year.
People who are interested in senior housing here tonight, I'd like to get your thoughts.
Well, Earl Strout, because the family's involved in projects along this line, we've had numerous people very interested in senior housing. So I think that there is a very clear interest in this town to solve this particular problem. A lot of people want to stay in town, a lot of them live up in the mountains, and they'd like to get down to be closer to the water level of Avon. So I feel that there is a definite need for senior housing, and we should not be intimidated by not proceeding with what you're trying to do.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Yeah,
To be waiting another, I can definitely see waiting. However, I've been hoping for about 10 years. Yeah, we were on the aging in place through, all the senior housing. And so it is disappointing, and decision will have to be made soon, about moving or not moving, or, that type of thing. So, because I rent, rents are going up. Laundromat is still in limit, so,
I can't help you with the
It's-
laundry.
No, I know, you put that in the mix. So it is very disappointing.
Hey, John, could you summarize that comment for me? I couldn't hear it.
Yes, that was Lenore Bolton, and she was saying that she thinks the Red Sox are gonna have a bad year this year. No, she was saying that, she's been waiting for a long time. She understands, the issues here, and is sympathetic about it, but that, she's been waiting a very long time, and every year that it doesn't happen is a problem.
Another year, yeah, okay.
Another year, which I understand is sympathetic. Let me,
Can I ask a question?
oh, please, could
I
you,
came-
could you identify yourself?
Sure,
for me?
Erica Schoenberg. I care very much about this issue, that's why I'm here, but I am late to the table.
Yeah.
Not just tonight, but I don't know, I'm sorry, I have a very brief recap
Sure.
on what this represents?
what
And
it
what all the
does?
Sununu stuff had to do with it?
Okay, well, the Sununu's, or let's leave the governor out of it. The bill the intent of this is to address senior housing specifically. The bill would render all incentivized, and we're using incentives here, all incentivized senior housing in a municipality or town would force it to apply as it stands now to all housing. So the idea behind incentivizing senior housing is regular housing is generally more profitable and easier to do. So incentivizing senior housing is encouraging it. And so that was the idea behind it, and to have that specificity towards senior housing taken away is an obvious problem. What we do here, and everybody else jump in because I'm not gonna remember everything, is we make it possible to build new housing of up to 10 units. Right now, with regular housing, you can only convert from a building that's been around for 5 years or more to 6 units. So this could be new or repurposed. And that's a major incentive. It's only in the Lyme Commons Center, although we have said repeatedly that we want to get this done, and we will look at other areas next year. So does that help?
A little bit, thank you. But, and the specifics of the article,
Yeah.
that's something that's been hashed out over, I'm sure this, obviously this wasn't written last night, so I
Hashed out
understand.
is a very, yes.
I mean, so things like no more than 2 residents,
Yeah,
there's a rationale for that, I just don't know what it is.
yeah. We originally put in language that, well, first of all, it's for 62 and older only, because that was the consensus of it. We didn't wanna go, you can do 55 or older, but you can have, you just need one person 55 in each of the qualifying 80%. 80% of all the units have to be older persons. It has to have at least one person 55 or older, and you can have a wide range of ages otherwise. And we really wanted to target what I consider real senior housing. I mean, I think there may be applications for that in specific situations which might work, but that's the demographic we wanted to target. We originally had language in allowing a caretaker to be able to be a resident in the apartment. But we were told legally we can't do that. But we do have a mixed-use component, which means, the way we phrase it, if I think it's over 70% of the gross floor area, but essentially it's over 70% of the project is senior housing, there can be a mixed-use component, which means that there'd be the ability to either have some sort of reasonable business in there that, you know, might be helpful to seniors, and or you could have caretakers or family living in one of those other apartments.
Yeah, I'm sorry to just
No,
now show up and ask
that-
questions that were discussed how many times, right?
That's why we're here, feel free.
But my question actually specifically, what I was trying to understand was why only 2 people? Like if somebody's sister wants to live with them, I'm sure there's a reason it was restricted to 2, but I don't know what that is.
The reason for 2 is basically assuming that there were 2 people who wanted to, I mean, we could have made it 10, but that was the consensus, was 2.
And part of it also is, the board looked at the limitations of the Lyme common area for septic. And part of the thing that's going to limit the size of buildings is the capacity of septic. And so limiting it to 2 gives you, then you start adding more and more people, you would need more and more bedrooms, this is how the state defines how much you need for septic. And so limiting it for that 2 meets a senior housing state septic requirement. That, which is not as strict as one for more residents.
Or for standard.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're basically going, if you have a unit that's senior housing 2 occupancy, you're allowed 125 gallons per day, otherwise you would need 300 gallons per day is the.
And that's a major issue.
And so that's something that would, one of the big reasons driving the 2 people is the septic issue.
Yes.
So, there's one big piece of information that probably is unobtainable before the town meeting, which is, will this pass? But there's a lot of relevant information that we seem not to have even tonight to make even a provisional decision. We don't know really the politics behind this, how powerfully Sedona is behind it, who else supports it, who resists it.
Oh, you're talking about the bill?
The bill.
The House.
So we don't know enough about the bill to make, I think, even an informed decision tonight, though we probably could find this information and others that I'll mention in the next 2 or 3 weeks, if you could postpone the final vote.
We can't.
You can't.
We are up against the deadline tonight.
I see. Because the other thing you'd would want to find out is it restricted to the town common area of the year?
It's not, I don't think they could answer us, because it's,
Well, what's the intent? They could clarify that.
I sent, I communicated with different parties involved, and nobody could answer that.
And is it retrospective? Could they redo
That wasn't clear
all of
either.
the permits in town as it stands?
It's not clear.
Or just new building? Well,
I mean, the only thing we have to go on is the simple meaning of the language itself, right now. So, it's not clear.
Which are all good questions that you would ask in committee, because I would ask the same thing. If you say we have an incentive for senior housing in one district in town, Lyme Common or any one, then does that apply to all housing in all districts?
Right.
That doesn't make any sense at all to me
Right.
for any type of zoning.
That's what it-
So I would think something like that, unless it was really being railroaded, would have a hard time making it through committee
And finally,
without some amount of refinement.
can the town take a public position, either in the form of a written document or oral argument before the legislature, as a way of testifying how inconvenient and damaging this would be to our plans?
Well, I happen to have, first of all, I have communicated to the representatives about it and making some of the points that have been made tonight. And they have been passed on to the committee. for whatever that's worth. But I have something that, it's a page long. I mean, I could read it to you, or I couldn't, I mean, I don't know whether you wanna hear it, but
What's it say?
it, huh?
What's the summary?
Huh?
Can you summarize it?
Not really.
Is this your, I don't even know what it is.
This is my, I mean, actually, I wanted to put this before the board, to see if the board would endorse it, so that when I contact, people, I could say it was a board endorsed.
Why don't you read it, John?
Well, since you asked so nicely, and bear with me, I appreciate your patience.
Quick question.
Yeah.
My understanding of incentives, I think you're interpreting it rather broadly.
Okay,
Incentives typically mean tax incentives, rather than just different definitions of zoning.
it doesn't say taxes.
I know, but it says incentives, and that is typically in legislation what they mean.
Want me to read the bill? The bill says, if a municipality allows an increased density, reduced lot size, expedited approval, or other dimensional or procedural incentive under this section for the development of housing for older persons, as defined and regulated by RSA, blah, 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 it shall allow the same incentive for the development of all other types of housing development. Now, that seems to me, again, I don't mean to be poo-pooing this so much, but I've seen a lot of bills that are just terribly written bills, that have to be worked very hard in committee, and then they still don't survive. So that, beginning January 1, 2021, incentives established for housing for older persons shall be deemed applicable for all types of housing development, regardless of whether a local land use ordinance or regulation specifically provides for their application to all types of housing development. So that's what it says. That's pretty specific.
It doesn't say tax.
It doesn't say tax,
But
what
I
it says
think
is
tax
exactly
would be
what we're
the-
trying to
would
do
be the
here,
difference.
I mean,
would then apply to everything else.
This is
Yeah,
land use
in the
law,
opening
would be
part, they're
tax.
actually specifically citing the types of incentives. So,
And workforce housing does not include anything that's age restricted.
no, workforce housing is a state-defined, it's a variation on affordable housing. There are thresholds that you have to be under
Right.
in order to qualify.
On
But
the
that's
next
any,
page, they add, they can't be subjected to age restriction, is what on the next page.
you mean the workforce
In
housing?
this bill, it says workforce housing or are subject to age restrictions shall not constitute workforce housing for the purpose.
Yeah, well,
So-
okay, let me read this because it's relevant to what you just said.
Can I ask a question first, John?
Yeah,
So, I understand we're talking about this, and I came in a little late, maybe you've handed out, but I have yet to see the language of the proposed amendment. Is it public yet?
sure.
Where is it?
I can give you a copy right here, it's
Thank you.
copy paste, posted outside, it's on the website.
I couldn't
Okay,
find
thank
it
you.
on the website.
And my next question
I
is,
searched for senior and amendment and couldn't find it.
It is on, in the notice for the hearing, it's in the text, there's a link that has all the.
my next question is, 2 years ago now, the select board appropriated $1,500 for a study in town. Has that ever been published? Because that backs up the availability of what's in town. Is that published?
Yeah, it's on the website. It's the
The build
Okay.
out for the Lyme Common
not the
District.
builder, the,
The build-out analysis that was done.
no, it was, you're talking about the Lyme Community Development Committees.
No, the build-out.
The
Build-out
build-out,
analysis.
the regional planning commission.
Oh, the Regional
used.
Planning Commission, no,
Yeah,
I don't think the Regional Planning Commission is the board,
No, the one that
yeah, that
we
one I
did
don't.
after that. Because we finalized that.
Right, I think that the board wanted to work on that, so, and that has not been,
Oh, it should.
I know it
we-
should be,
we-
it's,
we
I'm
finished
trying
it.
to
We have-
get it all put together.
Yes, that
Okay.
was done.
Yeah.
Okay,
We got
so
nice
that
maps
needs to,
and things
that
like
just needs to
this.
be put out so
Yes,
that we can.
So
understand.
make sure that's put
Yeah.
out ASAP.
And that was actually a basis for what was developed
Yeah.
for the senior housing amendment, was all the work that the regional planning commission did, and then all the work that a bunch of volunteers did to make the build out even more realistic. So
Okay, can I ask one other thing before you read what you're gonna read? Because again,
Nobody wants me to read.
no, I don't, I'd be happy, but I'd like to understand how
Sure,
these
oh,
pieces fit
absolutely.
together, and I'm sorry, but I still
100%.
don't really. So one level of conversation is about state intentions.
Yeah,
This
I
is
mean,
about
in
a
terms of
town-
this, in terms of this, maybe it'd be helpful to like just separate that totally out. I mean, if there's anything you wanna understand in this, it has nothing to do with this, with the state.
Then I'm really confused, because it seems like the conversations continue to be interwoven,
Yeah,
and so I can't understand, it's hard for me to exactly understand this separate from.
I can understand.
But this is a town proposal.
This is the town
And it's separate
proposal.
from whatever's happening in the state
What happened is
legislature, but stuff is happening there as
Yeah.
well.
What happened is we proposed this and we were moving towards final approval, and I don't know, like a week or two ago, the understanding that this state bill existed came out. So that's what we're struggling with.
Okay. How that might impact any
Yes,
plans we
exactly.
try to develop.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right. Now, the time has finally come. And so, I would like everybody's feedback, and in particular the boards, about whether they agree in general with this or think I should tear it up. The unintended consequences of HB 62942B will likely be less senior housing, because senior housing incentives are targeted as a vehicle for added impositions and impacts on municipalities. In terms of rationale, there is a fundamental flaw at the heart of this clause. It conflates the needs of statutorily distinct housing types with each other. Senior or older persons are defined and set apart as a distinct group under both federal and state law. Federally, this group is even granted certain exemptions from the Fair Housing Act. New Hampshire law likewise grants special status under 354A15, and even provides for a senior citizens Bill of Rights, 161M, that applies solely to this group. The special needs of seniors when it comes to housing are delineated. As such, local ordinances and incentives written specifically to address these special needs by definition are not the same as those that would apply to all other types of housing. Therefore, mandatory piggybacking of all other types of housing onto the back of senior housing ordinances is illogical and flawed zoning. As an example of the distinctions, workforce housing criteria purposely excludes senior housing priced at or below workforce housing, as somebody pointed out, at or below workforce housing levels from being counted towards the town's workforce housing stock or fair share. Why does the state take this position? It appears the state recognizes that workforce housing requirements are targeted more towards families with children and thus an overall younger demographic. Senior housing, on the other hand, is geared to a much older demographic with fewer or no children around. It naturally follows that appropriate incentives and locations for senior and workforce housing in a municipal ordinance will often differ because the needs of both groups as defined by law are distinct. HB 162942B ignores these distinctions and carelessly lumps all other types of housing together. Responsibly addressing and incentivizing the needs of any housing type requires addressing those distinct needs with care and specificity. This does not mean there can be no overlap in terms of solutions, but municipalities are in a far better position to understand and carefully apply those solutions locally. Using incentives specifically designed for senior housing as a springboard for incentivizing all types of housing makes little sense. It should be abundantly clear that when standard housing is equally incentivized with senior housing or with workforce housing for that matter, higher priced standard housing is what will likely be built. Further, by conflating the needs of different specially defined housing groups under the law, this bill does a disservice to each of them. Thank you for listening, and this will be on my next album. Anyway, thoughts?
Sounds good. Can you deliver that testimony in person? Is there an opportunity to do so?
in person is way better than mailing it. If there's a way to get one of us down there to get in front of the committee.
I'm fully in favor of one of us getting down there. I'm not sure that one of us will be me. Yeah.
Well, again, having sat on the other side of the table, hearing it from citizens who've been working for hours and hours and hours on this, and having them stand there and say, this is what I've been doing with my life for the last 6 months, and you guys are about to blow it out of the water, it's pretty powerful stuff.
Okay.
More powerful than your beautiful writing.
Yeah, okay. Any other thoughts about that? Brett?
Well, I've been here for the majority of your meetings this fall, and a lot of effort was put into making sure this was senior housing, that somebody couldn't grab the ball and run in some different direction. If this were to pass, basically, somebody can grab the ball and run in a direction that I don't think the town really wants to go. And I think that it's unfortunate, but, and I understand what Vicky's saying, well, pass it, we'll deal with it later, but I think if you pass that, and somebody comes in with one of these projects that really wasn't intended relative to, say, having senior housing, you're gonna have a really hard time clawing that back. And you're not, and you're gonna, if you change zoning ordinance now, the likelihood you'll ever change it back is slim and none. I think that it's disappointing, and I think it's disappointing to a lot of people probably here, but I think the better part of wisdom, you ought to wait a year, see what happens, because you cannot fix this once it goes wrong.
Well, thank you, I appreciate you, that point of view. I'll just say for, on a personal level, when I read that bill, my heart sank. And you have been here for a lot, you know what went into this, and how much thought and effort. And I'm really torn. I'm really torn because of what, Lenore's, and a lot of people, you're not the only person you're speaking, but Lenore's situation is, it's one more year. And on the other hand, our responsibility not to gamble, on hopes and dreams of, gee, I hope it'll turn out well. So this is a really difficult vote for me.
I can appreciate what Lenore is saying, but if somebody's standing there gonna build A or they're gonna build B, they're gonna build the one that they can do better with, and it won't be senior housing.
Oh, man.
Well, I think maybe another point is that senior housing can be built now.
Yes, it can.
Without this amendment. And actually, there's at least one possible project that may happen for senior housing without, it could be done without this.
Any further thoughts here?
Well, if you wanted, that your statement to be a statement from our planning board, I like the sound of it, it's hard for me, I like to
I would
read
send you a
something
copy.
myself, I would want that to, but I would like to endorse something that would come from our full board rather than individual.
Yeah.
I know that if this 1629 continues on, that Hanover will be sending somebody to talk to committee or, I think it's to the floor, to that, because there are actually a number of provisions there that, the training requirement and passing a test, I think that is something that might scare people away from volunteering to be on a board. And I don't know, selectmen don't have to pass anything to be selectmen, so why would they pick on land use board people? So I kind of feel like there are a lot of little digs in here that aren't appropriate.
Well, yeah, my takeaway from not just this bill, but other bills is there seems to be a slew of clauses aimed at disempowering local municipalities.
Yes.
Period.
Yes,
And it's not a coincidence that they're all in there at the same time.
it's not a coincidence.
John?
Yes.
I haven't said anything up to this point.
I noticed that.
And I think the bill that's down in Concord now is a reaction to the fact that there's not a lot of housing. And everything I read, and I read a lot about this, everything I read points to restrictive ordinances that make it hard for developers, for people to come and build. I have specific concerns about this particular amendment, and I think there's specific concerns about the ordinance in general that make it just very difficult for modest price housing to be built. Let me go through, I posted this on my website just today. I got a letter from a neighbor that said, I really can't understand this senior housing amendment. And I said that I understand the board has their heart in the right place, but the language in this amendment is very restrictive, and I don't think that anybody will build senior housing under it. We have an affordable housing chapter article in the amendment. I don't believe anybody's embraced it and built anything under it. My concern is this amendment would have the same fate. When I look at what it'll be cost to develop 10 units in downtown, in the Lyme Common District, my number comes out around $400,000 per unit. That's consistent with what another applicant, another person in town came in and threw that number out. So,
That person was doing it under the existing 6-unit conversion.
exactly. Oh, yeah, no, exactly.
And this allows 10. It also allows mixed use, which would mitigate, and I'm not counting on your numbers.
Right.
I think at this point, it's important to note, and you should state
Mhm.
this. You're a backer of the petition zoning amendment. You've been speaking on its behalf. You spoke on its behalf on its introduction.
Mhm.
And you said, I think on your site that, now Lyme has a choice.
Right.
So
let-
I'm not
John,
done,
you're
Rich,
interrupting.
I'm not done.
Yes, you are
No, I'm
interrupting,
not,
John.
I'm the chair, and I'm saying I'm not done.
Okay.
Okay?
Mhm.
I'd like you to get into the habit, when you're making these points, of pointing out that you stand to have an extreme benefit, so that the public understands that you personally stand to benefit by the petition zoning amendment that you speak on behalf of.
Okay. I'm not speaking, first off, I stipulate what you just said. I am a part owner of the Lockline Lodge. You may very well know that we've brought a housing proposal there. The board has not, the ordinance does not permit it right now. We're trying to get it changed. So let me stipulate that, put that up front.
And you own additional land there as well.
My house is right next door.
Right.
Yes. So, that said, I'd like to come back to this amendment. So the land is expensive. The number of units that are allowed are relatively small. If you allowed the land to be used, if you allowed the development to be elsewhere in town where the land is less expensive, that would improve the cost per unit. If you allowed more units in a development, for example, like 85 Dartmouth College Highway, or some of the other suggestions that people made, specifically, could the senior housing amendment address it? That would also reduce the cost of the units pretty dramatically. My numbers, I can show you my numbers, $100,000.
I looked at, but I think your logic is flawed in the fact that you're saying that there's gonna be an economy of scale for building these things. And yes, there will be for the builder. The driving the cost of the units for the consumer is going to be what the market bears.
Let
And
me
you don't
finish.
take care
Yep.
that into consideration. So
Let me
I
finish.
think your final numbers, because I did look at your website,
Okay,
read it, and
good.
that was the first thing that jumped out at me, is that you're ignoring that the cost of the units are gonna be market driven, not the developer is gonna say, look, I can build all these units for much less, so I'm going to pass that on to the consumer. I seriously doubt that would happen.
May I continue? Thank you. Second, this amendment, by and large, requires that existing housing be torn down or remodeled to build senior housing. We've talked about
Actually,
conversion.
I'm gonna address that.
Just-
When
no,
you say torn down, it doesn't encourage tearing down, quite the opposite. It says that it exempts many of the buildings from being torn down, okay? So
Okay.
go ahead.
So it needs, the existing housing needs to be significantly changed. And so we lose those units to make maybe more units, but we lose those historic units.
No historic house can be torn down. It's in there, if you'd read it.
All right, I had.
Well, I guess you forgot.
So, I guess not torn down, but we've already spoken about, in the meetings, we've talked about the expense of converting. Let me keep going, and we'll come back, you can come back. There are vacant lots in town that conceivably could be developed under this senior housing amendment. I made a map, I can show it to people later. You could already put senior housing there under the current ordinance, as far as I can tell. You don't need.
No, you could not build 10 new units.
I don't know, some of the vacant lots you could.
How?
Certainly
Now, how?
up on,
How could you
You
get
could-
10 units on a lot?
you could do planned development.
You could get 10 units on a lot?
Sure, you can have 2 buildings of 6.
If you had two lots.
With a planned development, you
Yeah,
can have
if you had two lots.
I believe you're
I mean, and you moved it into one lot.
No, a planned development allows
know.
multiple buildings on a parcel.
Right.
And multiple units in a building.
But you would have to qualify for 2 subdivided lots to have the 2 units.
I don't believe the planned
To-
development. So,
correct.
let's keep going, let's
No,
keep
no,
going.
no, let's clear that
All right,
out.
so-
You would have to qualify for 2 subdividable lots that would result, then you could do 12. And then you could build, if you did that, if you did qualify, and there might be some that would qualify for that, then you would be able to build 12 units, right?
I believe you're mistaken. David, do you have the ordinance there?
Yeah, right here, here's the planned development.
Yep. So, planned development, first off, is a mix of residential and institution or business uses on a single lot in more than one building on a single lot. The planned developments are allowed by site plan review in districts shown in table 4.1. The uses in a planned development shall include only those permitted or allowed by site plan review in the district where the development is proposed. Planned development or change of use in a planned development shall be reviewed by the planning board.
I'd like to move this along.
Okay.
Let me make the point about that. Anybody or not anybody, but most people, if that exists as an option today, which is you're saying, there's planned development, they're not building senior housing. Right? So this is a way to encourage it.
So let me finish then. It will be hard to design homes. My neighbor wrote that it feels difficult to understand this. It's even harder for the developer, because not only do they need to figure out what the units should look like, how big they should be, all those things
Do
that
you
are
recall that
important.
we had developer input, or we had input from people who are experienced and successful in projects in Lyme, and that felt
I
that
do.
it was feasible?
You're speaking of Brett's
Yeah.
input, yes. And that's good.
I think so.
And that's useful, but it limits the footprint, it limits the number of units, it limits who can live there, and those are each hurdles for developers who might want to come and do it. And last thing I'll say is that the language is prone to legal squabbles, that the ordinance, the amendment requires that the development be harmonious with the character of the neighborhood, and yet it allows a 12,000 square foot development. This is about half again as big as the Lyme Country Store. It allows this in a neighborhood in the Lyme Common District where the units are, I don't know, maybe a third of that size. And so it strikes me that this is prone to cause lawsuits. If a developer said, I want to do this, even if the planning board said, yes, this is exactly what we want, the developer faces a lawsuit, or worse, the planning board faces a lawsuit from neighbors who say, no thank you, I don't want to see this. So, for all these reasons, I don't think this is attractive for developers. And so I don't think we'll actually get senior housing from it.
Okay, that's your opinion. I would also like to point out, as one of the criticisms that you leveled, that this doesn't address, it only addresses the central district, and other things could happen. As you know, we have repeated over and over again that we will look at other areas, but we wanted to get this done in time for town meeting. So I think that's kind of a specious argument. And in terms of the different types or sizes, the harmonious character to the neighborhood, or whatever the phrasing is very standard language throughout New Hampshire. And what we tried to do is create flexibility where certain types of sizes and shapes of buildings specific to the characteristics of that area might work well, where in other areas that wouldn't work well. I'd like to give the public an opportunity. Yeah.
Let's start again. Listening to all this and trying to absorb it all, I would suggest that we look at the reason we're here and what you propose. If you're gonna worry about Concord and those coming and goings, a year from now, they may still have it on the books. And if Concord's suggestion doesn't make any sense, then it's better to get the towns in Hanover and tell them it doesn't make any sense. But I would, if we keep worrying about what can happen, which has some merit, we're never gonna get a darn thing done. So I'd like to go, you guys have put a lot of work in this, and maybe it's got some flaws, so be it. Anything we do has flaws. But I would not get too tied up in some hairy ideas in Concord, period.
Yeah, I'd like to address two parts. I'm dividing what you said into two parts. It's hard to express how much work went into this and how much thoughtfulness went into it. I'll leave it at that. And to your other point, frankly, I am really torn. I agree 100%. I don't want this to go another year. And on the other hand, I'm really concerned. You know, it's not something that might happen. Right now, it's happening, and it's backed by the governor. So I am concerned about it, and I'm torn, and I frankly, at this moment, don't know how I'm gonna vote.
Right.
But I would like as much feedback from the public as possible to help me. Yeah.
I think your statement to the legislative committee is a great one. And if you can't find another volunteer, I'll deliver. But we have a senior housing committee in town. Don't we, or-
No, we had an aging in place committee, this
Aging
is,
in place.
that led to this.
I think you should take the message. How about that? I think that's a great idea,
Thompson.
but I
What's
don't
that?
think,
Ellen Thompson.
Yeah, it
You
should be
know what
great.
the next workshop is? Is there a workshop scheduled?
I don't know,
They-
but
they'll tell us
really what, I mean, let's
Friday.
hold that statement in abeyance, because what the board has to deal with now is what we're gonna do. And, I'd like to get a sense of where, I'm not asking for a vote, but I'd like to get a sense of where everybody is at least
I'd
leaning.
like to see if other people wanna speak while they're
Yeah,
here,
I mean-
because they're suffering us right now.
Yeah, I really encourage you to help us on this. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm Rich Mengy, and I think, I appreciate the work that the board has done on this, and, you know, I concur with Brett, that I think that it might be premature to bring this to the townspeople for a vote this year. And wait and let the legislature and the folks that are making the laws make sure that we don't open ourselves up for something more undesirable, because, yeah, I mean, it's gonna be what the market can bear and what the market forces are looking for, and, you know, I mean, I think if, as you say, you can develop senior housing already, but there doesn't seem to be much coming in, so, you know, why don't you wait?
I mean, the part that caught my attention about what Brett said earlier was, once this is in there, it's gonna be really hard for, if the language ends up being bad, it's gonna be hard to get it out of the ordinance. Anybody else?
Question, how would you change this, or how would you wanna change this, if this draft legislation passed? Would you think then we wouldn't allow senior housing?
No, senior housing is allowed by law.
No,
But,
how would you?
but well, that's
Yeah.
exactly what the point of what I read
Right,
was addressing, is that this does away with incentivized specific senior housing.
so
Well,
you
we-
then, if
we-
it passed, you don't see any way to incentivize senior housing?
Not specifically.
No, because whatever we do specifically for senior housing would apply to everything, so we'd have to go through and reconsider any incentives for senior housing and say, how would those be palatable for all other types of housing? So essentially, you have to go back and just relook at your entire ordinance and try to figure out whether you should have more lenient zoning town-wide or not. I mean, ironically, of course, the alternative, well, one of the alternatives, or one of the proposals for this petition zoning amendment is to have basically no restrictions, which, that's what the petition zoning amendment
Well, I mean,
would do.
Let's stay away from the petition zoning amendment for this discussion.
Well,
But to address what you were saying, I would have to start from square one and see if there is any way to encourage senior housing specifically, you know, possibly with workforce housing. But the whole premise of this was to specifically address senior housing. So if what you're asking is, you know, how would we revisit it? We would see what the new law is, and then see how and if we could do something under the new law.
I think one of the things that you need to remember is that the senior housing proposal was designed specifically for the Lyme Common District. And this new proposal from the state would open that up to everywhere. So assumptions that were made based on lot sizes, septic, and in the Lyme Common District could get applied to lots that are much larger throughout the entire town. And so you could have some larger lots that are out at the end of Dorchester Road that the same rules would apply to. And so you would be putting, you could end up with much larger developments further out. And I think that's the risk that the board is worried about,
Yeah,
is
I
that
mean, this was done for an area with inherent limitations. And trying to actually expand the possibilities within those limitations. When you take that to areas where the areas are much greater, it doesn't translate in terms of intent. And not only doesn't it not translate in the way you're talking about, but then it applies to all types of housing. And that was not at all the intent. Yeah.
So, I'm concerned that I did not read that particular splitting of hairs that David just mentioned, that it looked to me like you could restrict it to your district, your Lyme Common district, but that all of the incentives that you're providing could be used by any housing type.
But it doesn't say that, that's an assumption.
It doesn't say that, but it says if it allows this, and this, then that same allowance for that development of other types of housing needs to be, I'm
Right.
paraphrasing, but there is nothing in there that clearly expands it out to the other
No,
areas.
but I think the word is clearly, and I raised it with the representatives, that we have a benchmark. It doesn't say clearly whether it does or doesn't.
That's true.
And it also.
It's not crystal clear.
Yeah, which, you know where that can lead.
Yes, I know exactly.
And the other thing it
It's not
doesn't
in writing,
address
it's not.
is we have a benchmark in there. It doesn't address benchmarks.
Right. So,
If what you're afraid of is true, wouldn't it kind of rule out almost all zoning then, statewide? Because
In terms of, no, and that's the other really strange thing about this, which I also communicated to our representatives. Any municipality that has not tried to address senior housing is unaffected by this.
I see.
Only those of us who are trying proactively to address this are given this burden, which is, just mind-blowing.
Counterintuitive.
Just, that's fundamentally
Hanover's
so
not gonna go for it.
So,
They
who?
Hanover won't, I mean, they have so much senior
They
housing.
might not have a choice.
But Hanover, they don't have a say. None of the municipalities have a say.
I'm saying they lobby against it.
No, I can promise you though, that Kristen Noonan does not care what Hanover thinks.
Yeah.
So, that,
He's not taking the pulse
Yeah,
of
right,
Hanover or
he's-
Lyme.
yeah.
Yeah.
so,
I'm sorry, but you weren't done. Go ahead.
so I would just say that, given that expanded conversation, although I am squarely behind a proposal such as you folks have worked on and drafted, I think it would be much, I don't know the right word to use, I'm gonna say safer, but that's not
Prudent.
really.
Prudent.
Thank you very much, to put this on hold for a year and see where this goes, because those of us who've lived in this state for even a short while, know that the legislature here is a little quirky, and you have no idea what might be going to happen.
That's what I'm concerned with. Rusty?
So can I change gears just a little and ask you to explain to the people here how this will be enforced, your proposed amendment, if we do go, I'm not here yet,
Yeah,
we're not going
yeah.
through with it, but if it goes through, how will it be enforced?
There's enforcement in
Can you
the.
just
in the-
summarize without
Yeah.
reading it?
Can you read the
Yeah, I can,
enforcement issues?
yeah. So, I assume you're talking about the age restriction, and, one of the provisions in the proposal is the owner of any senior housing dwelling unit is responsible for supplying proof of each of the residents' age to the zoning administrator by the last day of January of each year, and whenever a new resident occupies a senior housing dwelling unit. Upon notification by the zoning administrator or any resident of the town of a failure to comply with this requirement, the select board shall be responsible for enforcement and shall take action within 14 days.
We have a problem with that aspect of all of our rules in this town right now, so we're adding another layer.
No,
What else do we
but
have?
we're we're trying to
I
plan.
understand.
So just to
Wait,
flesh
wait,
that. I'm
Sue
sorry.
hasn't had a
Go
choice
ahead.
yet.
I'm curious as to why you have to prove your age every year. It's not like you're gonna get any younger.
Well, the thing is that tenants change and or whoever is
Once-
living there
Once
changes.
people have, they should only have to do it once.
Well, we wanna know who's there every year. I mean, it may be that there's a death and somebody else moves in,
But if the
somebody
same
moves away.
people are there.
Yeah, I mean,
year after
Sue,
year.
I get, your point is a good one, and, that's a minor point that we can change, but basically, walking over or sending over somebody with your driver's license or some ID, proving your age isn't a terrible burden. But, yeah, I get your point, and that's something we could address.
Could you add language to the ordinance to say this is on hold until the state has acted?
You don't add, first of all, we can't add, we're out of time.
All right.
What I would like to, well, first, we're gonna vote, and depending upon if we vote against it, I would like to provide a statement to the town about exactly what happened here. And if we pass it, then that won't be necessary. Any other comments? Okay, so I'd like to get a sense of the.
Brett has a half a comment.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
It's somewhat redundant, but I really feel like if you pass this and the state does do this, much of your zoning ordinance just went out the window.
Yeah, I agree.
And, I certainly haven't lived my life that way.
Brett Ryan is saying that if it so happens that we pass this and that somehow this language, the state language is passed, pretty much the whole zoning ordinance goes out the window.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I hear you. I'd like to just at this point get a sense of the board, because it'll actually help me. But what's everybody leaning towards at this point of the voting members?
My question.
State the question, John.
At this point, this isn't a final vote, but at this point, are you in favor of withdrawing this proposal or moving ahead with it? And we'll just go around and poll everybody. David Van Lee?
Well, I guess my question was gonna be, if we, as a board, pass it, and then we take it to the town, and then in the meantime, this bill passes, and then we say to the town, please don't pass this, then they might pass it, and then we would have no zoning, so, I guess I would have to say we would have to postpone it, based on what we have today.
Vicki? You want me to come back to you?
I really wanna believe in a democratic system that does good things. And, that we might have something like that still in our state and, and that bringing evidence as to why 1629 is not a good idea or provisions of it are not a good idea. Me personally, for the Lyme Common District, I wouldn't like it, but if they said, this would apply to, for senior housing and that you'd extend it to workforce housing, I'd be happy to have the workforce housing in our common district, and it's near the school and their services. But, the whole idea of, this density, going all over town on every lot, 10 units is not my idea of a good thing for our community.
Okay,
So I would,
yeah.
I don't like that, so I'm very disappointed. Cause I think the senior housing amendment's a good idea for the town. And even if it turned to workforce. So, I wish I knew the legislature better.
In terms of your comment about wanting to believe in, I think we all would like to believe that, but I'm gonna quote Ernest Hemingway, who said, it's pretty to think so. And I think to the, you know, what some people are telling us, and, you know, realistically, gambling with the future of the town is a problem.
Yeah, no,
Tim?
Well, when I came in tonight, I was really thinking that I would wanna go ahead with it and take the risk, but after listening to all the comments tonight, I guess I agree with David and Vicky that it's not worth the risk.
I can't tell you how disappointed I am. But I think the point about the risk, even if there's a 10% risk, I don't wanna take it.
That's what I was gonna say, 'cause I think there's a better than 70% chance that this language will be very different by the time the bill, if it gets passed, goes through.
But 30% is a big
But
chunk.
you just don't know, and there's too many bills out there that have really stupid language in them, that people regret and spend a lot of time trying to patch up later.
All right, Kevin?
Yeah, I would definitely withdraw and delay and see the results of the House bill.
Are there any comments before we vote? Yeah.
I just want to say that you shouldn't be as disappointed as you're expressing. What this board has done as a result of enormous amount of work is consolidated a consensus on the part of the town for senior housing, at least along the lines that you've laid out. I know that some objections, but I think you've provided remarkable service and both intellectual and legal cover for senior housing. We will have it if the legislature doesn't act ridiculously the next year. And you're responsible for that, and many of us are grateful for your work. So do not feel as discouraged as you did. You've accomplished a lot.
I'm sure we all really thank you. I mean, we really appreciate it, yeah.
I also think that the action that you're taking tonight is a good example to bring with you when somebody hopefully testifies that this is the sort of result of the action. Yes, exactly, that you're delaying some really good things. I think that's.
Okay, I'd like to move ahead. Oh, yeah.
I should say, if in fact she's correct, and I think you're reading it exactly right, I think they're not gonna expand it. I think they mean wherever you've got senior housing, it's allowed. If that were the case, would you feel comfortable going ahead?
I would feel more comfortable, but it's not clear. And I can't count on it being clear. But I would be, if that were clear, I would be tilting much more to the other side.
So if you were gonna go testify, you wouldn't say, we don't want any development, we wanna say, we just wanna make sure that you only would apply this restriction where we've only allowed senior housing.
Yeah. Yeah.
My only comment is that this is not a guarantee that senior housing is gonna be built. This opens the door for a potential developer. If there's a potential developer out there, you can show them this work, and it's gonna get passed in the next year. It's gonna take them more than that year in order to develop their plan. So they can know that the town's in favor of it and begin their plan.
That's a good point.
Okay.
All right, I think it's time to vote, and you know, seriously, thank you so much for your input. You really have helped us tonight. I mean, I'll speak for myself, but I'm sure I'm speaking for the board. It would have been much more difficult without your really intelligent, helpful input. So thank you. I think, how do I phrase what I gotta do here?
I'd like to move that we vote in favor of the amendment, but that we delay it a year to take to town meeting. I don't know if we can do that.
I think it'd be much cleaner to just say that we're, you know, because
Just trying to make it positive.
because it may be that language goes in, you know, we end up with language that we would still want to modify this.
Okay, that's true.
So I think you want to withdraw it for this year
Yes.
and reconsider next year.
Yeah.
Okay, so
we can improve it in the next year.
Let's make a motion that we are withdrawing this article, the senior housing Article 13,
Well, we never even sent it forward to town meeting, so we're just gonna, I would say, table it.
Well, so we're gonna, what is the expression, expedient to legislate?
Inexpedient to legislate.
Inexpedient.
No.
Okay.
It's too risky to
yeah,
legislate.
Too risky to legislate. All right, so I'd like to propose a motion to table it, to table Article 13. Do I have to say anything else? Or is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that's unanimous, 5-0. Yeah, yuck. All right. Well, thank you. Not exactly gratifying, but. All right, so let's move on to the petition zoning amendment. I sent language that essentially it's draft language for me. And I wanted to get the board's input on the language that I'm thinking of, because I want to make sure what I'm saying is fair and reasonable. And see also whether the board would be interested in endorsing it.
So, John,
Yeah.
actually, as a procedural matter, I had opportunity to speak to Steve Buckley down at NHMA, speaking about other things.
Okay.
But I also specifically asked him about this question.
What question?
So.
What question?
So the question was, I said, is there a precedent or a mechanism for members to create dissenting opinions for circulation before a town meeting? And so I think that's pretty analogous to this. This is.
Well, dissenting, what do you mean, opposing? You mean
opposing what?
Dissenting is, I wouldn't say this is dissent,
Yeah.
I'd say it's
Opposing, right.
in opposition.
And from my notes, this wasn't the thrust of my discussion, but my notes from his response were that some towns prepare a voter's guide. You need to avoid electioneering and discourage pros and cons. So I think before.
Well, hold on, so when you spoke in favor of the petition zoning amendment?
No,
is that-
I was asking, do towns ever produce, what he called a voter guide, that's sort of what I had in mind. A discussion of the reasons to do something and a discussion of the reasons not to do something.
Okay.
His advice, I wrote down 3 things, that's all.
Do you have, were you speaking on the phone or was it by email?
It was on phone.
So this is your memory of the
I
conversation?
contemporaneous notes, like they say. And so, I guess my advice would be to ask NHMA this specific question, to say, is this something that's advisable?
Well,
worth
I
doing?
guess we could do that. I don't have a problem with that. What is the board's sense?
So I want to be clear about what is the statement going to be, how are you going to use the statement?
It would just be,
So would you read it at Little Town Meeting?
I
or-
might.
Okay.
I think I might anyway,
Yeah.
whether the board endorsed it or not.
Oh, okay.
But I was interested in getting the board's feedback.
Yeah.
The board doesn't have to take a position if the board's not taking a
Well, we already
position.
took position.
Yeah.
We already took position, we
It's-
did not
It's true,
support the
it's in the
petition
minutes,
amendment.
right?
Yeah.
It's gonna be written in the warrant,
I'm gonna be on the
Right.
ballot.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, so,
Right.
but we didn't, so,
Mhm.
that's clear. So reasons, I'm happy to explain why I didn't support it. It's in the minutes, one
Mhm.
reason.
But you're not gonna be at Little Town Meeting.
I will not be at Little Town Meeting, I'll be, but you are welcome to come to
Yeah,
Hanover
well-
and see what that planning board's doing that
Well,
night.
but that's why I'd like to
Yeah.
have a sense that I'm not speaking,
Yeah.
whether, I'd like to know, am I speaking for myself or am I speaking for the board? That's the clarity I want.
Yeah.
And does that seem like a problem for you?
So I think clearly you can speak for yourself, there's no question about that. I think if you are asking to speak for the board,
Mhm.
you should talk to Steve Buckley and see what that says. That would be my thought.
I don't know who Steve Buckley is, but
He
I
is-
could speak to somebody at the board.
Right, he's, I think, lead counsel at NHMA for this
Here's a
process.
question we can ask town council.
We'll just ask town council.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, I'd rather have town council.
Mhm.
But that's fine.
That's the extent of my
Okay.
thought.
All right, so we'll put that in abeyance. Is it, anybody have any comment? Yeah,
So are you talking about the petition zoning amendment?
yes.
And so has this board taken official action to?
The board opposed it 5-0, and there are minutes and that reflect that, and Rich Brown posts his videos, so
Right.
you could watch the whole video of the meeting. You might have been there, right?
No, I wasn't
Oh,
there,
you
but so at town meeting, this petition article will come up and it'll indicate the Lyme Planning Board opposes this
Yeah,
amendment.
will it say 5-0? or?
I think it's just the board disapproved of it.
Yeah,
It'll be on the ballot.
so, yeah,
They usually have to vote on
what?
it. They usually have to vote on it.
Some years it changes a lot, as I recall.
I'd have
Sometimes
to
it
ask
has.
Patty, because she's the one that does the ballots.
Yeah,
The last minutes I could find on the website were October 24th.
Yeah, I have to get some more posted. We're shorthanded right now. We have one person who is out, or no longer with us, and so we're still trying to play catch up on a lot of things. And then the minutes for that meeting where the board voted have not been approved yet. That would be,
we were to approve those tonight. Yeah, I mean, it would be great to have all of the minutes, I mean, not just the planning board minutes, but to have things up quickly, obviously, yeah.
It just seemed to be a little bit of a confusion, but I just want to show for the record that this can be discussed at Little Town meeting, but it will be a ballot warrant vote, so it will not be discussed at town meeting.
Right, that's right,
So
yeah.
if you want to hear about it and talk
This is
about
not-
it, come about it.
This is not, when you go into town meeting on March 10th, this will not be discussed. This will be on a separate ballot, but there will be no discussion. The discussion will be on March 3rd at Little Town meeting.
Correct.
Thank you. Yeah,
John, I think it'd be very helpful to the town if the 5 members of the board who voted against the petition amendment would adopt a statement as to why. And that statement could then be posted on the town website so that everyone in town could have access to it.
well, that was what I was getting at, but I think that Rich has raised a question, and I want to make sure we're doing things correctly.
That runs the risk of electioneering, and basically the minutes of the meeting and the vote you took is what statutorily required.
I think what we'll do is ask the town
Right.
attorney.
Exactly.
Yeah, we
Well,
don't,
that's the
we
risk.
don't want to do anything to jeopardize
Yeah.
the integrity.
Well, what I would be in favor of doing now is agreeing to a statement that would be reflected in these minutes. And if we can't circulate it any further than the minutes, then we adopt the minutes and they get posted so people can read, and they could be directed to the minutes and read what the statement is.
Does anybody have a problem with that?
Yeah.
You do?
I think it's pushing the limit.
Okay,
It's
so
electioneering, so.
let's make sure, we have a meeting in 2 weeks, and I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure we're doing the right thing.
Well, I think we all need to get websites so we can.
You mean our own blogs,
Our own
instead of
blogs, yeah.
Rich having the only blog?
Right,
I have a
right.
blog,
Yeah.
but I don't do town stuff on it.
Yeah.
I take guest postings, I would absolutely accept
Oh,
guest
you wouldn't want my guest
You know,
posting.
I
No,
would
you wouldn't.
absolutely.
No, you wouldn't. All right, so moving on, I think we'll go on to the minutes, unless there's anybody.
I've got a question, John, for David Robbins.
Okay.
So I don't have the planning board committee guidelines for a committee member, but I'm somewhat aware for the select board. The question really is, David, is any planning board member withdrawing them and saying that they are on the planning board for the town of Lyme, like Mr. Richton?
That's, I have to talk with NHMA about. I don't know, I've contacted them myself, and but I don't know what their rules are.
Well, I don't know if it'd be their rules, it'd probably be more like the town, and what you have, I'd have to go back and dig through the planning board.
I know that there's restrictions on town council, but, as far as other services, I don't recall anything in any of the handbooks preventing that.
So any member of any board could contact NHMA, is what you're saying?
I believe so. When I called them, they said, now who are you? And I said, I'm an alternate of the planning board. They said, oh, okay.
Okay.
So I think it's okay, you should check.
Yeah.
Yeah, again.
I don't think they have any limitations as long as you're.
Anytime a question comes up, let's just clear it up.
Yep.
Okay, any other questions?
What I'd like to do is give you some comments on what was written and publicly give that to you. I can't meet with you in
Okay.
private to do that.
Is this okay with everybody?
Yes. That's what it says, but.
No, I actually think, from what I've heard, I would wait until we.
Yeah, all right, let's just do this as clean as possible.
Yeah, I will contact Laura tomorrow.
Yeah, okay.
Ask the question.
So let's get that cleared up, and also the issue about who can and who can't contact NHMA, because I know one time I wanted to, I don't know who it was, but somebody told me I couldn't, so.
Can we send our comments on this to David and have him interact?
What, let's leave it.
Okay, leave it. Okay,
Let's
no,
leave
okay,
it
all right.
and not have
Not
anything.
good. Okay, not very good.
All right,
Well, we can do it, things as individuals, right?
Yes.
So,
individually, yeah,
let's start with-
all right. So, anything else before we move on to the minutes?
What comes after the minutes?
The hours. The end of days.
So I can go home, right?
You can go home.
Yes.
No, there's no hidden agenda, there's nothing. We wanna go home.
Really good stuff.
We wanna go home to Lyndon.
Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. All right, the minutes. I do have some, at least clarification.
I have an error that I need to fix too, so.
Okay. How many people have Anita comment? Okay, anybody else? Okay, so I'll go first and then Rich. Can you hear me?
We haven't said hello in a while, I'm sorry. I wrote a nice letter to you.
Absolutely. I don't think that.
I appreciate it.
Page 3 of 3, second
I
paragraph.
find it a little strange
I
that
don't
I'm seeing
think that
things sort of the way he does it.
Well, we got
Stated, so
Scott
I'd like
Nichols
to
to
say,
sign
John
that letter
stated
that I
that
wrote.
based on his
I was gonna send it to you,
review,
but you don't seem to have an
this
email.
proposal,
I do.
and add the language.
You're not giving it out?
No, I
Were you?
Oh, good.
Second,
I've been sending you the letter.
paragraph.
We got a ton of interesting, Scott signed it, he said, I've never signed it.
What is it?
Pearl of Colony.
John stated that based on his
Albert
review,
Bloch
that
signed
his
it,
proposal.
Alfred Bloch. Brian Ridgway signed.
So
I think we have a representative.
Yeah, that's where I'm.
Johnny told me.
Oh, I have.
Very great. Yeah.
You must have the.
Oh, it's in the last paragraph of page 2.
Okay, yeah, I mixed it up, okay. John stated that based on his review, that this proposal was essentially strip development and, I'm sorry, was essentially strip development and could allow for structures that are very large with no restrictions on any kind of business use.
Your support of this is gratifying.
Okay, I'll just read it.
It gives me to write it down.
Okay, oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, I know.
After the word proposal
Wayne.
was
We're
essentially
both good friends.
strip development,
And everything, yeah.
and then, and
surprised about Tom.
could allow for structures that are, and now here's new
You know,
language.
Tom?
I do. Not
Well,
everybody
he's
does.
a very
Very
sweet
large
guy.
with no restrictions on any kind of business use. And then cross
I just
out
thought that
I'm sorry.
So he's probably a little bit Chris Jackson.
Oh, no.
Okay, what do you want me to cross out?
Cross out much larger than residents are accustomed to.
Who does?
The person
And
who has
then,
the arm in the sling.
Okay,
I'll
I think the
But he's waiting for
phrasing.
you.
Mary Kelly, Brett
Kevin's
Ryan.
could
Hi,
be
Brett, how are you?
Very my wife.
could be-
So,
Yeah.
I'll send the letter and,
Kevin noted that current zoning, you say allows for much greater, I think what you said, Kevin noted that current zoning promotes
no discussion.
organic growth, but that, and then after organic growth, the petition would
Yeah.
say, but that this proposal, you should add but that.
But you would have thought things. I mean, we got a lot of support, just like Scott said.
Okay.
If we had
And then moving
discussion, which
down,
one?
where it says, John explained to the public that the board's vote to disapprove would be noted both on the town warrant. I don't recall saying that, so I think it'd be better to say it was explained.
Go for a bigger commercial district.
And
As long as
I
it's
think I
controlled.
missed,
You know, subject
yeah,
to
I missed
parking.
something. And Rich has some changes, but I felt like what Mr. Brown, you call him, and I would say the petitioned article would benefit Mr. Brown, and that he should publicly acknowledge it. Mr. Brown agreed. I didn't really quite,
There's quite a lot of stuff that you still have to do.
I didn't get the rest of the, I would cross out everything after and instead say, and that he should probably, publicly acknowledge it, Mr. Brown agreed.
There's businesses.
And,
Hold on, let me.
oh, I'm sorry, I keep rushing.
15-minute discussion.
Is that acceptable to you, Rich, or do you want to change that?
So this is in the paragraph that starts out in order for full
Yeah.
disclosure.
There's.
Yes.
Okay. And then the final thing I
Well, let me,
promised.
I just want to
Oh,
stop there.
okay.
Commercial in this town.
So you add, and that he should publicly acknowledge it. And the said, Mr. I would say the said, Mr. Brown agrees.
Okay.
And again, with referred to Mr. Brown, a variety of housing options in Lyme and would aid in, as I recall it, he was referring to business
My
enforcement
letter's a
issues.
little more dramatic.
But you can speak for yourself there. I don't think you were referring to general enforcement, you were referring to business use, as I recall.
Yeah, well, it's the,
Okay, good.
Brett.
Okay.
Okay. Starting on page 1, I believe Wilk's last name is McClave.
That's right.
McClave.
Good catch.
That may have been a. You were right, that. Sometimes trying to read people's names off the sign-in sheet is just, it's brutal, and then.
That's why I try to print my name.
You get very few people who do that.
So, going down to the second page, second paragraph in item 3.
Item 3?
Yes, so this is the, John opens a public hearing, that sentence is okay. The next sentence I'd like to replace with this wording, and I will hand it to you, but, so instead of there was no reply, I would say no one stepped forward, period. Rich asked the question whether the board had notified the applicant. There was no notice.
Well, if you're gonna put that in there, Rich, then we can add that it's not the board's responsibility. I mean, I don't wanna get into this argument, let's leave it general.
There is no requirement to notify anybody in
And
particular.
And you know very well from your experience of proposing petition zoning amendments what the procedure is, so it was no surprise to you. I don't think that's an appropriate addition.
Well, actually, planned development isn't allowed in the rural district now. So if there are less than 100 owners there in the rural district, and more than that.
Yeah, there's 170.
Yeah, so no. So there is that requirement.
Right, no, I looked into that,
Yeah,
that's.
property owner, when you
Yes,
change a
right.
district or have a
Mhm.
new
Right,
use.
right,
you-
right.
So there is, that is.
Yeah,
a-
and
But that didn't
that's
apply.
why I can
That
tell you
didn't
there are
apply here.
170 odd owners of property, because I
Mhm.
looked into that as,
Yeah, okay, so.
Not
you
really
should-
wanting to
you
have to
can't
send
say
out
that
100
as a
letters.
blanket statement.
Anyway, I'd rather not get into a back and forth about that particular issue. It's stating,
the statute is very clear
It's
that the
stating-
board, at their
it's-
next meeting,
it's
sets
sta-
up the hearing, and if somebody asks, you know, it was posted on the website, and it.
I do
very
recall
easy-
you raised, or somebody raised that issue, and I believe it was Vicky, or somebody said that's really not the planning board's responsibility, and you know that, I mean, you know what the procedure for petition zoning amendments
Okay.
before, so it just seems like
Alright,
specious.
good. Then I need not hand you this paper.
Okay,
Okay.
I have no other
I have
corrections.
one correction. then.
Oh, and David, I'm reminding you now to remind me that I need to sign.
You can't leave until you sign. On page 2 of 3, under the corrections, the second one, yours will read this as a correct address number 4, and it'll be just 2 empty quotes. And I just want to put in the name Bethany Carrion is the person who,
Oh, so are you gonna add that to the minutes?
that's the name, so that
Okay.
it's
Does-
clear.
Does Kevin have to stick around now? Oh, he has to vote.
He has to vote.
Okay, you still there, Kevin?
I am.
Sorry.
That's okay.
All right, so are we done? Okay, I'd like to propose,
Adopt the minutes as amended?
yeah, do I hear a second? All right, all those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, so Kevin can go?
No, actually, before we go, why are you trying to get rid of me?
You.
Compassion.
Yeah, compassion.
He's lying in bed with a drink in his hand, he's all set.
Yeah, how's that margarita?
I believe wine's his drink.
What else is on the agenda, John?
That's it. You might think.
I've got a question for Rich.
Mhm. Oh, I'm sorry, oh, I do, that's the mistake of, oh, God, where is this thing? Okay, I was asked, I'm asked every year to provide something for the town report.
Right.
So I have a draft, and I need to go over it with the board.
Dina needs it by tomorrow to
Yes,
get it in the
so-
town
Well,
report.
you just have to add something
No
about
rush.
why the senior housing amendment.
Yes, so let me read it to you, and I would like permission from the board to add that language on my own, because I don't wanna stay here any longer, it's okay. The planning board spent the first part of the year finishing up work on the Lyme Common Zoning District build-out in relation to a potential senior housing article. That general time period was also used to complete work with the Lyme Community Development Committee. Consultants hired to study taxes and development presented their findings to the town. That was followed by a town-wide questionnaire for feedback and the related tallying of results. The board completed a mixed-use senior housing article and was ready to send it to the voters when they learned of a very controversial clause in the state's pending House Bill 1629, which would eliminate any municipality's ability to specifically incentivize senior housing. And then I'll add to that, what we did.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is a website reference to where the community development committee's report is,
In
that. So people can see, if you want to see the report.
Yeah, ask me and I'll send you the link to it.
okay, and so, the consultant's results, or
The committee report,
the committee report,
yeah,
okay,
may be found at blah, blah, blah.
okay,
Just so people can follow up on that if they're interested.
okay. And-
Could there also be a link to the build-out study?
It's gonna take, I still need to put, it's still in pieces. I need to put it together, get it into a PDF and post it. I don't have the link until I get that done.
I can
And
say that the,
look at the planning board's page and I'll have it there, as soon as I can.
is that okay?
Yep.
with you? Okay,
Alright, maybe, John,
yeah,
when you talk about explaining why we voted the way we did, you might wanna add that
before you wrap up, I've got a question for Mr.
Okay,
Barrow.
I'm not done yet, but I'm almost done. Towards the end of the year, some Lyme citizens presented the town with a petition zoning amendment. The planning board voted unanimously 5-0 to oppose it. For this new year, the board has previously discussed exploring other ways and additional places to encourage senior housing with mixed use, as well as updating the master plan. Is that okay?
Sounds ambitious.
We're here to be ambitious.
Okay,
Any objections to this?
no,
Okay.
thank you so much for doing it.
You're welcome. Please go ahead, Kevin, sorry.
Yeah, so Rich, when you mentioned that you talked to NHMA, and
Yes.
could you share with us the subject matter?
I was asking specifically about what is, what if anything I need to know about on my website, on my blog. Are there any concerns there? And he said, First Amendment of the United States and all, and so that was the impetus for that call. And I had also got feedback from another resident in town saying that the state of California produces a voter guide, and the Secretary of State does this, and it puts out the pros and cons, and so it's one trusted place where voters can go to read the information. And so that's kind of why I asked that question, since I had a legal expert there.
So that was all that you discussed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, but I've still got some concerns with
Okay.
that, is that, NHMA is there to help us,
Yep.
and to serve the town.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not really supportive of you calling an HMA, telling them that you're an alternate on the planning board,
Mm-hmm.
to find out whether or not your website is kosher.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's.
So maybe addressing that, maybe in the future, except under emergency situations, I would exempt that.
Well, I think, John, I think the planning board's handbook needs to be modified, or to incorporate, that there's guidance around
Okay.
who and when contacts NHMA. I mean,
So,
they're
okay.
there, we pay for them to help us with issues that are around the town specifically, not for one individual's purpose.
I think
Yeah.
there is a committee handbook
Yeah, it
that
doesn't
covers all
address it.
committees, and I think it's put out by the select board, and I think the select board would be the authority to make that determination.
Okay.
Not just, because I think it's something that's, would be important for all committees, not just the planning board.
I agree.
Right.
Okay, so we'll expect then that the select board will address this?
Yeah,
Okay.
Because it's not what they're there for.
Okay,
It's-
no, I
yeah,
understood.
And it's
But-
not addressed in the committee handbook, because I have a copy and I just looked, and
Okay.
there's nothing about that, but you might also say too, contact with town council is in the same.
Mhm.
Well, that is spelled out.
Well,
No,
No, it is.
I have an older version then.
No, I mean, the town council, I think David, Dina, and the select board chair are the only three.
That was my understanding.
Yeah, and that's, I believe that's was agreed to with the town council, and it's just, I don't know that it's ever been anything
Well,
written
okay,
down.
well, we'll put, if it's not there, then we'll put that
It's
into.
not.
Okay, so I think the takeaway from this, Kevin, is I think you're making very important points, and so just so I'm clear, this will be something this isn't gonna be a planning board matter, this will be a select board matter.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
understood. Thank you. What else was it? I can't remember anything at this point, I'm so
Need a
frightened.
motion to adjourn?
Anything else, Kevin? Is that all you had?
That's it.
Okay, so we're gonna close here. Thank everybody for their work. I know what I was gonna say. I did look at your blog, and this is just my personal comment. You have this thing, a disclaimer, and you say that you may be on the planning board.
Bob,
It's,
is that disingenuous?
yes,
Okay,
you are on the planning board.
all right,
Yeah, it's disingenuous.
then I may,
You may be
then I may
on,
belong to,
you may belong to it.
yeah.
But we have to guess. So that's just my, this is not an official thing, I'm just saying, that I noticed that, it was a weird phrasing. It should be stated clearly.
I mean, either you are or you aren't.
Yeah. All right, so I'm making every kind of motion possible for us to go home. Does anybody object?
I'm already at home.
Yeah, don't rub it in.
So
Okay,
Kevin, this is Liz, we missed you at skiing today.
Liz says she misses you at skiing today.
Yeah, I missed out the whole day, actually, just being sick.
All right, so, do we need a second, or we're out of here? We're out of here. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Except for you.
Yeah, except for me.
Don't forget to sign it.
Don't forget to sign that.
Sign what?
Well, I don't know, whatever it is, sign everything.
Sign everything.